a not-for-profit organisation providing digital services and solutions for education and research, and she manages the Archive Hub service, which aggregates descriptions of archives held across the UK to enable researchers to locate primary sources quickly and efficiently. So I'm going to hand over to Jane now for her presentation.
Okay, thank you ever so much for letting me speak today. I'm very pleased to be part of this conference. As was said in the introduction, I come from the archives world, so I manage the Archives Hub. But today I'm talking about a project that we're working on, which I think might be relevant to a lot of people within the cultural heritage domain. I hope so. But just to say what the Archives Hub is, this is not to talk about the Archives Hub. However, we are an aggregator, so we bring together descriptions of archives held all across the country. So our area of expertise, at least we hope so, is in bringing together descriptions from different repositories done in different ways, understanding how to bring together and aggregate them and create something where people can cross-search archives held in the UK. Okay, so in terms of discovering archives, I think it's very much the same in the archives and library world. The old kind of paradigm is very much the idea that you describe an archive through a description, something that in a way still has some references to the idea of a document that describes an archive. And it's really quite a one-to-one relationship. And so far, in terms of our standards and the way that we've thought about cataloguing, we often think about it as one catalogue document, one document describing a collection, or of course it could be a book or another artifact. Now, with this particular project, what we want to do is start to move away from that kind of idea. Increasingly on the Archives Hub over the last several years, we've been thinking far more about this as data rather than descriptions. And when you think about data, you can think about the different important parts of the data, the different ways into the data. So of course you could look at subjects or places or languages, different aspects of the data. But for this particular project, we're looking at names. So we're looking at names, personal and organisational names, although in this talk I'll talk more about personal names. So we're looking at them within the data. Now, at present, obviously on the Archives Hub, as in with most of our catalogues, you can search by person and you get your list of results and where they're held. But as I said, it's still very much, this is the person, and then you get to the description of the archive to find out whether that archive is relevant to you. So it's still very much that relationship, which I've put here in an extremely simplified diagram. So, you know, the top left is this idea that the name, the archival creator, the author, other names, any kind of agents are within the description of the archive. Now, increasingly in archives, and I think in other domains, there's this idea that they should be separate, that they should be created in a separate database, exist separately from the archival resource or other resource. But it's still a fairly one-to-one kind of relationship. What we want to move towards is something where we're seeing the names or other areas of interest within the data in their own right. We're seeing them as of primary importance, and they can link to the archive or to the other resource, to your library resource or whatever, but they can also link to all sorts of other resources. So it's about bringing it out from being, in a sense, locked in to the description, and looking at how we can make archives far more part of the information landscape, if you like. Now, this isn't going to be an easy challenge for us. We are an aggregator. We aggregate from 350 different institutions across the country, as shown on the map there. As many of you will be aware, archives are hierarchical, or at least they may be hierarchically described. So we have descriptions that are very hierarchical, very multi-layered, some of which just have a couple of layers, some of which are collection level only. So the names can be scattered throughout those kind of multi-layer descriptions. And of course, there are a great deal of variations in how the names appear and how they occur and the sort of information that you have with the name. So it's quite a tall order. Having said that, there are some projects happening at the moment, quite exciting projects in this area. So I just wanted to point to one in particular that you may be aware of, Social Networks and Archival Context, otherwise known as SNAC. So this is a Mellon-funded project based in the States. They're doing something fairly similar to the sort of thing that we're looking at the moment with our names project. They're trying to pull names out of archival descriptions and out of other data as well, and bring them to the fore, make them the main, what is mainly represented on the interface, so to speak. So you're searching for a person or organisation, and then you can find related archives and other resources. The other thing, if you do something like this, is that you can start to do quite exciting things, looking at graphs and visualizations, looking at relationships, all sorts of interesting things. These kind of visualizations aren't particularly difficult to do. The reason they're difficult to do is usually because of the data and the problems with the data. If you have good data, this is this kind of thing that you can achieve. I also thought I'd just show you this example. Now, I used to use this example quite a lot. I thought it was quite a good site. It's an Australian site. It was called the History Wall. I was having a look just a few days ago when I was looking at this presentation, and I realised that it has completely vanished and I can't find it anywhere. But I felt that I'd keep this in because I think this is actually one of the problems that we have with these kinds of projects and initiatives that we carry out across cultural heritage. This was a great resource, interesting resource, looking at timelines, names, and how things were interrelated. But it was a finite project, and I guess the project ended, and the resource ran out, the financing ran out, and it's no longer available. And many of us will be very familiar with that kind of problem. So just going back to our vision and what we want to do, you have those problems, as I said, that short-termism in a way, and the way things are funded. And yet there's so much we could potentially do within our domains if we start to think more about the data that we have, how we can interrelate the data, how we can allow our end users to create their own narratives, their own stories, to go across our data, not to think in terms of archives, libraries, museum, art, but think in terms of people and events, stories and narratives. I think that's something well worth getting to, well worth achieving. Now, on the Archives Hub, we've already carried out a number of projects, these finite projects I'm talking about. We had two quite important linked data projects. So we've already done work in that kind of linked data context to think about drawing out these elements, these entities within our data. So this is just an example when we did a linking lives project, a linked data project. We thought about how can we model our data? And of course, this is the kind of way that we can link up to library data, to museum data, to other types of data, if we start to model data in this way, whereby the archival creator, the archival resource are just two parts of the model. What we wanted to do was think about creating an interface a bit like this. Now, this is a mock-up, but this was the idea behind our linked data approaches, to start to create these kind of biographical interfaces. Another project that we carried out a few years ago, a little more recently, was a project called Exploring British Design. So I've got the URL up there for that. And this was a really exciting and interesting project to me. This took a subset of our data around British design, and we worked with the data. We wanted to see what we could potentially achieve with the data if we focused on a specific set of data with some algorithms, some coding, but also some manual editing work. So it was a combination. And what we came up with was something that wasn't based on searching archives, it was based upon searching people and relationships. So in this case, you can see a page for a particular designer, and we were interested in how is that designer related to other people, to other organisations, as well as what are the bibliographic resources, the archive resources that are available about that person. So if I just open that related people tab, you can see we were interested in exploring how people are related, so influenced by, collaborates with, wife of or husband of, this kind of thing, and seeing the sort of power that you can get with those kind of relationships. We also actually, with this project, modelled events, and curiously to me, really, within the archive world, we we don't concentrate a great deal on events, which is slightly ironic, seeing as history is basically events. But still, that's something else that we looked at, modelling. In this case, Britain Can Make It, an exhibition. Who was involved in that? How were they involved? How were they kind of related? And then again, what are the archives if people want to go and have a look at primary source materials on this? Where can they go? Where can they find out more? Okie doke. So that brings me to the current project, the current names project. Now I say this is a project and it is being done as a project, but most significantly, this is now kind of game on for us with how can we do this in our service? How can we do it at scale in an automated and sustainable way? And that's such a game changer. It's such a different thing from a finite project. So how can we deduplicate names? How can we work with these difficult names that we need to work with? So be prepared. The next one is a diagram of what we're going to do. Here we go. Okay, so when I put in for this presentation, I wasn't sure how far along we'd be with this project. And this is basically about how far along we are. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we've decided to do. What we needed was something that, as I said, we could implement and then could tweak and develop. It had to be kind of sustainable, had to be scalable and sustainable. So what you can see in this diagram, the red boxes are a somewhat old-fashioned way of representing archives, descriptions of archives. So there you've got your descriptions, as I said, in the good old-fashioned way, a description of an archive. Within those descriptions, there are people, so and organisations, as I said, we are looking at organisations as well. So the people there are represented, say the blue people may be our archival creators, and the black people there, the icons are, say, other people associated with the archive. So different names, some of which may have biographical histories. What we're going to do with this project is take all of that data and dump it into a big bucket at the bottom there. So you can see that all goes into something I've made vaguely bucket shaped. All of the data is just literally dumped into a container, so to speak. Alongside that big bucket of our data, we're going to have buckets of other external data, what you could call name authority data. So there I've referred to VIAF, the Virtual International Authority File, and Wikidata as examples. Doesn't have to just be them, but any kind of data that we want to work with to help us with what we're going to be doing. So that's going to be another big bucket of data. Then with this mass of data that we're going to have this process of tokenization and deduplication, which I'll move on to in a moment. The idea being that once we carry out those processes, we can do different things, such as what I've outlined in the green box there, creating biographical interfaces, creating visualizations, doing different things with names, hooking up to different other different resources and services, and so on and so forth. So before I go any further, I should say what I should have said at the beginning, in fact, is that this work is being carried out by the Archives Hub in conjunction with our system provider, who are Knowledge Integration. Some of you may have come across Knowledge Integration. They do a lot of work in the museums world, and they also run the Archives Hub service. So the technical work here is being done by knowledge integration. So what's going to happen is that this big bucket of data is going to be put through this process of tokenization. Now, I won't go into obviously kind of the technical side of that, possibly partly because I'm not sure I do it very well. But the really important thing about this process is it's a way for us to implement levels for confidence matching, because all of this is about de-duplication and matching names. How can we say this person is the same as that person? That's the absolute key here. That's the heart of the challenge. So the way we're going to do that is tokenize or fragment all the data into small pieces and start looking at matching, implementing levels. So for example, we could have level 1 might be, this is where we say there's definitely a match. There's no doubt these are the same people. And we might decide that that's only going to happen if they have the same ID, say a VIAF ID. So if you have the VIAF ID in VIAF, obviously, the VIAF ID in Wikidata, and also some of the hub data has VIAF IDs. So you can say the same ID, it's the same person. Level 1. Level 2, we need to be more configurable, and that is going to concentrate more on the actual name. So the name as a string, the name as individual words, the date, epithets. It's a question of where we set the thresholds, and we need this to be completely configurable so that we can change our minds about the level of confidence and see what happens with the matching. Another part of the technical aspect of this is dividing all of the content, all of this data up into bigrams and trigrams, which are basically 2-word and 3-word little sections of data that you then compare. Now, those are going to be particularly useful because, as well as looking at the names, we're going to be looking at things like biographical history. So we might put that into another level, say level 3, a supporting level, to say, okay, we're looking at the names, we're trying to match the names. Let's look at the biographical history. What have we got in there? Because you might have places that people were born, or other people that they work with, that kind of thing. So you're trying to use supporting information to help you match names. We're also looking at hyperchorisms, which is a new one on me. Some of you librarians out there may know this. So hyperchorisms is, it's basically kind of pet names or terms of endearment. So it's where you have James, Jimmy, Jim, for example. So we might be doing a bit of matching there to see if we can pull out names where it's the same person, but they have, you know, the name is James or the name is Jim, for example. So that whole area of the work is going to be infinitely configurable. So it won't be a case of doing it right or wrong. It'll be a case of trying it out and adjusting it. Once we've done that, it then goes into what I keep thinking of as the washing machine. I've got this wash tub idea on the brain now, of the de-duplication index, which goes round and round and sees what it can make of where we've put our confidence thresholds, how we've configured this. And we see if we can group the names so that we can find where this person is the same as that person or not. So that's the de-duplication, where we'll be grouping records. So as I say, if we can match names and say this is the same person, we can say we have a group of records. So that what happens then is the group record becomes the primary record. So say we find, you know, 20 Winston Churchills and we match them all, we get a group record for Winston Churchill. That's great. Otherwise, if we still have single names, they are the primary record. So in other words, a primary record could be a single name, individual, on its own. It hasn't been grouped in any way. But if names have been grouped, they become the primary record, and then there are children within that group, if you see what I mean. So that's a way that we can get around the problem that we're not going to be able to match all the names. I'll just show you an example of that, which may make it a little clearer. So here we go. Here's an example of a name. This is typically the sort of information that we'd have in the Archives Hub in terms of names. So here we've got several Beatrice Webb formations for her name. We've gone through this process that I've been showing you. Maybe the way that we've configured it, we found that 4 of them are matches. We're confident that they are matches. So that becomes the primary name, and those 4 become children of that primary name. That means we can just display the primary name to the end user, and the children are no longer displayed. So it's a way of deduplicating and providing one name behind which we can have a load of information. However, we know we can't match all the names. So there's a couple of examples there where maybe they're not going to be matched. And so you'd have those examples of Beatrice Webb as separate primary names. So ideally they'd be matched. So there's a dotted line. We might say possibly they are matches, but we can't say categorically they are matches. And I've also put Beatrix Potter down the bottom, who often gets confused with Beatrice Webb, because she was Beatrix Potter Nee Webb, died in the same year. So hopefully that wouldn't be a match. If we put our confidence levels wrong, maybe that would be a match and we'd have to adjust our thresholds. This is an interesting area to me, because one of the problems that we have within the archives domain, which I think is less of a problem, I would argue, in the library domain, is that we have this long tail of names. So we have a lot of people that are essentially unknown, kind of anonymous in some degree. And if I show you an example, here's a list of names that I took completely randomly from the Archives Hub. So this is exactly as they appear in the Archives Hub. Now, I think in the library world, usually when you put a name in, that they are more known because they're published in some way. Whereas obviously in archives, you can have people that are a correspondent, or, you know, they appear in some kind of deed or something and you know nothing about them. So you don't know if they're important, if they might link to other people or not necessarily. You can see at the bottom there, I've got Joan, for example. Now that looks a bit daft to have somebody in there called Joan and nothing else. But of course, that's probably where she's a correspondent, and the only thing that the archivist had is, this is a letter to Joan. So it's kind of reasonable to put down, but not very easy for matching. I've put another example here just to show you the sort of thing I mean. So I picked a random name where I thought there'd be a number of them, David Davis. Okay, so if we think of that as data we have in the hub across all these different descriptions, you can see there's 5 descriptions with that name, and I've pulled out the name as it appears. So the question for us is, how many of them can we match up? Maybe they're all different people. Maybe they're just 2 different people. You can see there's obviously 2 different people by the dates of birth. So it'll be exactly the same idea of running this system that we'll have up and going quite soon, in order to figure out where we can match these names. So that's essentially what this is all about. It's all about looking at the names, seeing how we can work with them, seeing if we can bring them together, saying this is the same person, and therefore being able to create biographical interfaces and all sorts of interesting, maybe timelines, ways to connect different people. It's really the start of that. Now, alongside doing that, I've been blogging quite a bit about a lot of the issues involved in names and name matching. So some of you may be interested in that. That's on the Archives Hub blog. I've particularly become more interested in the issues around ethics with this, in terms of when you pull information together, somebody who maybe was anonymous becomes identifiable, and how does that work in terms of what the rights people have over their name and over their identity, and what you're doing in terms of this kind of work. I think there's a great deal to be explored there. So that's really where we are with us, with knowledge integration, working in partnership to try to create something where, instead of this walled garden where you simply have, here is a description, here is the archive, it's kind of having building blocks, pulling them apart and seeing if we can put them together in different kinds of ways. So one of the things we're going to be doing with this project, for example, is working with our colleagues in the Library Hub, and I know they've been speaking at this conference because they have VIAF-IDs, for example. So this might be a really good way of starting to link the Library Hub and Archives Hub together.
Okay. I just wanted to say we're almost at the point now where we want to take the questions and answers.
That's absolutely right. I was literally on my last sentence just to say, that's where we are at the moment. This is the first phase, but the whole idea of this is that we have subsequent phases and that we build this into the Archives Hub as a sustainable kind of idea, as a sustainable process. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. I'll stop my share now.
Lovely. That was great. Thank you, Jane. Sorry I had to butt in there. It's only because we've had questions, so I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to answer them. So thank you very much for that. It's an intriguing project, and I'm particularly interested in the idea of being able to link up the Archives Hub and the Discovery Hub. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yes, yes, we're very keen on that.
Excellent. So I'm going to go straight into a question that we had, which was from Anastasia, actually. And she says she would be interested to hear about what consideration was given to issues such as privacy in terms of the collections and the resources and the people that are named in collections.
Yeah, so that's going back to what I was saying about ethics. I mean, to put it kind of bluntly, none at the moment. I'll qualify that in a minute. So none at the moment, because at the moment we're working kind of behind the scenes. And I think this is a good way of doing it because we're not going to create an end user interface at the moment. At the moment, we want to see what happens when we set something like this up and what we end up with. And I think that'll help us a great deal with clarifying our thoughts around the ethics of this and identifying people, because of course, all of these people are already described in the metadata. And it is up to our contributors to decide if that's acceptable when they send it to us. So they put a name in, they put the life dates in. Now, very, very occasionally, we have contributors that say, could you take away, say, the life dates of somebody or something, very occasionally. So I'm sure a lot of us are aware of that kind of thing. But it is this idea, I was thinking about things like pseudonyms. Somebody has a pseudonym because they want to be known by that name. And what we're doing is basically going to try and link them up to their, you know, to their kind of real name or to a different, you know what I mean? So I think there's a lot to be explored there. We haven't done that at the moment, but we'll be able to do it more as and when we do this matching and find out what we get, and also read the blog.
Thank you. And we've got another question here, this time from Martin. He says, apologies if this has been made clear already, but are you creating your own authority index or feeding into one?
So we are using the authority indexes that are out there, like VIAF and Wikidata and SNAC, the one I showed you, for example. We're going to use that as a bucket of data along with our data. And then what we'll be creating are our own grouped names. So they won't really be authority data in that sense. It'll simply be a way to deduplicate names. So I wouldn't really call it a names authority in that way.
Okay. And one final question and a comment as well. And this is from Helen. Excuse me. She says, that was so interesting. Thank you. Are you able to share any more about how you're reconciling names with Wikidata? And Helen says, I am about to embark on trying to work out how to do that for our theses data.
Yeah, okay. So not too much at the moment, Helen, although I've put a little bit about Wikidata on the blog. But I'm definitely, the blog is very, very much me talking a little bit like I have today, going through how we're working things out. So it's really looking under the bonnet, and we will be blogging a bit more about Wikidata. We've done a little bit of work around that, but not too much at the moment. So sorry, that's like not yet, but it'll definitely be there and on the blog And I always post on Archives NRA and on our Twitter feed when there's a new blog post on names.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Jane. That was really excellent. Thank you so much for that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a 10-minute comfort break. And then when you come back after the break, we're going